my power on? Well, we are in a series on marriage. The title of the series is The Two Shall Become One, and the mini title is Taking Offense or Being Offended, because this is that me? Well, so here's a little story. Little girl goes to school. She comes home, kindergarten. She's so excited because they told her the story of Cinderella, and she didn't know that story. And she's like, Mom, there's this girl, and her stepsisters were all mean, and her stepmother was mad, and then there was a fairy godmother, and a pumpkin, and a slipper, and blah, blah, blah. And then she meets the prince, and guess what happened then? And the mom said, they lived happily ever after? No, they got married. Yeah, who needs a drummer now? Well, see, here's the problem. We often don't understand the difference between being offended or taking offense. And we kind of learn these patterns in our relationship. We very early on kind of behave in a certain way where somebody is a little more passive and somebody's a little more aggressive, and they just kind of learn their roles, and that becomes their normal. And it may not really be that happy. How many of you have ever seen the show All in the Family? Okay, I wasn't sure if we had people old enough. I never liked the show. I thought it was ridiculous, but I do remember one scene. For those of you who don't know, Archie Bunker is this grumpy old man. And he's like, and he complains about everything, and he sits in his chair, and he's not a nice person. And his wife, her name is Edith. And then they have a daughter, and I don't remember her daughter. And then, yeah. They have a daughter named Gloria. And then they have the son-in-law named Michael. But Archie, because he's not a nice person, he calls Michael Meathead. Yes. And I believe he also calls his wife. Yes. You can see he's not a nice person. Like if what does he call his daughter? Oh, see, there you go. I didn't know that. Hey, I've learned a lot about Archie Bunker this morning. So, I remember this scene though. They're playing Monopoly, and Michael lands on Boardwalk, and so he goes to buy Boardwalk. And Archie's like, and Gloria's like, Michael, Daddy always gets Boardwalk. And Edith's like, Archie works so hard, we always give Archie Boardwalk. And Michael's like, he doesn't get Boardwalk. There's no rule that says Archie always gets, oh no, Archie. And this is what happens. Somebody acts like Archie, and hopefully not as crazy as Archie, sometimes crazier. And then somebody else has to be Edith. And Edith is always reaping what Archie is sowing. And Archie thinks he's right, because probably as a little child, he was like, Archie, it's time to go to bed. No, I'm not going to go to bed. Archie, it's time to, I'm not going to go to bed. Archie, it's time. And finally the mom says, okay, fine, Archie, stay up. And he gets his way all through life because he acts like that. And no one ever is able to stand up to him or willing to stand up to him. And when people do stand up to him, he just raises the game. It says in Proverbs, correct a mocker, invite a beating. People generally don't like to be beaten. So they just say, fine, Archie, go with it. But little by little by little, something inside of Edith dies. It dies. And this isn't just true in marriage. I've said this is about marriage, but it's just relationships in general. It's people who burn through friendships. See, Proverbs 18:1 says this, an unfriendly person pursues selfish ends. Look, what are they pursuing? Selfish ends. They don't think of it as selfish because they're selfish. They just think that this is me. Yeah, it's all about you. An unfriendly person pursues selfish ends, and against all sound judgment starts quarrels. They don't even have a case, but they start a fight because they want their way. Other translations, there's debate on what those words mean in Hebrew. Other translations say they start an argument against sound judgment, which means there's just normalcy, and they want to fight against what is normal. Like you take your turn at the stoplight, and they don't want to take their turn because they have special rules. They have Archie rules. I always get boardwalk. Why? Because I work so hard. Edith tells me. This is kind of this mess. And so it is so important. It is so important that we are willing to look at ourselves and understand when we have been offended or when we have taken offense. Jesus talks about this in Matthew chapter 20. He's telling this beautiful story now, we're not going to go to the end of his story because I just want to make the point that we'll get to. He says, "For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day." By the way, a denarius was a day's wage. So he's like, "Hey, you want to come and work in my vineyard today? I'll pay you a day's wage." They're like, "Yeah, I need a job." About 9 in the morning, so this first group will say they are the 6 o'clockers. They're out there 6 a.m. About 9 in the morning, he went and he saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, "You also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. He went out again about noon, and about 3 in the afternoon, and he did the same thing. And about 5 in the afternoon, he went out, and he found still others standing around. And he asked them, "Why have you been standing around here all day long doing nothing?" "Because no one has hired us," they answered. Now, we don't know this, but I speculate that's not exactly true, because he went there at 6 in the morning to get workers, and he went there at 9 in the morning to get workers, and he went there at noon to get workers, and he went there at 3 to get workers. If they've been standing around, they must have only been standing from 3 o'clock on, which means they weren't overly excited about going out and getting a job. They weren't like, "No, man," but they're like, "Well, we stand here, no one has hired us. You also go and work in my vineyard." And when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first." So he starts with the 5 o'clock boys. And the workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came, and each received a denarius. They got paid a whole day's wage, and they started at 5 p.m. And then he goes to the 3 o'clockers, and the noon, and the 9, and the 6. And the 6 o'clock guys, they have an idea. If he gave those guys a whole day's wage, we are going to be rich. This is the best job we ever had. So when those came who were hired first, they expected. That's the key word. They expected. Something changed, and it was their expectation. They expected to receive more, but each one of them also received a denarius. And when they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. "These who were hired last worked only an hour, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day." And the only thing that had changed was their expectation. See, if the guy down here would have been given a tenth of a denarius, they would have been perfectly happy with their denarius. Or if he had said to them, "I want to give you 10 days' wages for your day," they would have been happy with that. But their expectation was that they would get more. No one told them they would get more. They were not promised more. And he says to them, "I am not being unfair to you, friend. I'm not doing anything wrong." And here's an interesting thing. Unlike Edith, the landowner did not take responsibility for their emotions. See, Edith is always like, "Oh, Archie works so hard. We have to." The landowner didn't say, I'm so sorry, I should give you more money. He's like, no. I'm not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? And you could substitute almost any word there for money. Don't I have the right to do with my own time? Don't I have the right to do with my own car, with my own fill in the blank? But you see, we live in this mixed up world where emotions all get crossed and tangled, and people take responsibility for things that are not their responsibility, and others don't take responsibility for things that are their responsibility. The Apostle Paul wrote in the book of Galatians, bear one another's burden. Each of you must be responsible for your own load. Load, burden. See, your house getting blown over by a tornado, that probably falls in the burden category. Your electricity bill, that's the load. But often people misunderstand. Some people think their load is a burden. They think something strange and unusual has happened because they have to pay bills. It's like, no, everybody has bills. That's just part of life. Others endure such heavy things, and they just think it's my load, and I have to carry on. And what the body is to do is to bear burdens, bear one another's burdens, each carry their own load. So what I want to point out in this story is that these men took offense. They were not offended. There's another story in the Bible. I'm just going to tell you this one. 2 Kings 5, if you want to go home and read it. Naaman was a commander in the army of Aram, and he had leprosy. And they had kidnapped, some raiders had kidnapped an Israelite girl, and so she became the servant of his wife. And she said, oh, if Naaman would just go to Israel. There's a prophet in Israel. He will heal him of his leprosy. So Naaman has his king write a letter to the king of Israel, and the king of Israel is like, what is he trying to, and he tears his clothes. My God, I can't heal him. And Elisha hears about it, and he says, send him down to me. So Naaman and his pack, they head on down to Elisha's house, and they're there outside of Elisha's house, and Elisha sends out a servant, and he tells Naaman, go and dip yourself in the Jordan River 7 times, and you will be healed. And Naaman gets angry. He's like, I thought he would at least come out of his house and pray to the Lord his God and wave his hand over me and heal the leprosy. I'm not doing this. I'm going home. We have better rivers back home. It's like, no, I should tell you the end of the story. One of his men said, dude, settle down. If he would have told you to do something great, wouldn't have you done that? And so Naaman calmed down. He went out to the Jordan. He dipped 7 times, and he was healed. But the point I want to make is that he got angry. Why? Elisha didn't do anything to him. He had expectations that were not met. And he became angry because he had expectations that were not met. And we all have expectations. Every one of us, even when we think we don't have expectations. We have expectations. I know you do. In fact, when I was at Living Rock Church, our children's minister was Kathy Sutherland, and it was time for the budgets, and she said to me, well, what am I supposed to put down for my budget? And I said, well, how much money do you think you need? I don't know. I said, well, of course you do. No, I don't know. I said, well, is $1 enough? Oh, no, I need more than $1. Is $10,000 enough? Oh, I don't need $10,000. Okay, there you go. You know it's somewhere between $1 and $10,000. But you see, here's my point there. Every one of you has expectations. You just probably have never thought through your expectations enough to put them out there so you understand what they are. You just kind of live with them. It's like a feeling. Like you expect you're going to get Boardwalk, or you're going to expect you will never get it because Archie gets it. You have these expectations. And some of our expectations are realistic. Some of them are healthy and normal. But when they involve another person, we can't make them happen, because then we are controlling and manipulating, and we are taking away freedom. We can't take away someone else's freedom, because then it is not love. Henry Cloud says, doing something out of guilt is not love, it's slavery. When you feel like you have to, because they're going to, anytime you have those words, I have to because they're going to, I have to, you know what? That's them. That's them. And I know we want to feel responsible for them, or we want the world to be responsible for us. But we need to understand what is a burden and what is a load when we take offense and when we are genuinely being offended. Now, next week we'll talk about what to do when we are offended, how to work through these things. So this is my favorite story about this whole being offended, taking offense thing. Other than the Bible. I like the Bible stories more. And I have permission to tell this because I asked the man. It's a great story. So there was a guy named Todd Wilsey, and he had a son named Ian Wilsey. And Todd was a great dad. He was wise. And Todd and Debbie, that was Todd's wife, they had wanted to have another child for years and years and years, and they were having problems. And then finally she became pregnant, and the whole world was happy. And then a few days before the child was to be born, it died. And they were just, oh. And then a couple of years later, they became pregnant again, and they had a little boy, and everything was so happy. But Ian, though he loved his new little brother, all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute. You guys are supposed to pay attention to me. This is my house. I was here first. And so one night, Todd says, Ian, tonight you have to take a shower because we're going to give your brother a bath, and we don't have time to give you a bath. And Ian's like, no, I want to take a shower. Todd's like, I know you want to take a bath. I know you want to take a bath, Ian. But you have to take a shower because we don't have time because we're giving your brother a bath. No, I want to take a bath. Ian, you're taking a shower. You hurt my feelings. And then Todd said, no, you got angry. There's a difference. This is the best line ever, though. Well, it feels the same to me. Because it does. See, when you take offense or you get offended, it feels the same. When someone doesn't meet our expectations, it feels like they did something wrong to us. And sometimes if a guy says, I'm going to go home tonight and I just want to have fun with the family and, maybe play catch with my boy in the backyard or something. And he gets home because he has these ideas of what a wonderful night it's going to be. And his son's over at the neighbors and his wife's at a Tupperware party. I don't even know if they do those things anymore. and he gets home and he's like by himself and there's a note that says, dinner's in the oven, love you. His expectations weren't met. And he can be like, oh, the world is... But no one offended him. He took offense. Big difference. But if he doesn't sort through that, he will act out as if he was offended. He will treat his family as if they did do something. He will wait for them to apologize to him. And they're like, what? Yeah, I know you think that would never happen in the real world. Here's another little story. I was over visiting a guy's house, and he was giving me a tour of all the amazing work that he had done, and it was like a lot of work. And I'm like, man, that's all, wow. And then he said, well, and he talked about his wife and how she had all these plans. And I said, well, man, she must think you're amazing. He goes, she needs 12 husbands. Because, see, her expectation was if it takes 12, see, here's a hint, wives. If it takes 12 husbands to make you happy, your expectations are too much, But we have to sort through these things. And if we don't sort through them, then we're constantly going around feeling like we have been wronged. And it's hard to sort through it. It honestly is, especially when you get mistreated or when you have been allowed to be a bully. Because when Michael said, Archie doesn't always get boardwalk, Archie didn't say, Oh, give me the rules. Oh, you're right. Whoever lands on it gets to buy it. I've been playing wrong all these years. Well, no, that's not what Archie does. But in that story, remember when Edith and Gloria try convincing Michael to let Archie get Boardwalk? That's what happens, because putting up with Archie is so painful that they try to take the functional, reasonable person and warp them. See, a husband and wife have a mixed up relationship, whether it's the wife who's aggressive or the husband who's aggressive, and then kids are born, and the other one's like, well, we just have to do this to make Dad happy. It's okay, I know, but just make Dad happy. And the kids grow up that way. Well, how do you think their relationships are going to be? See, that's why I have 1 point today. 1 point. I know some of you say, well, that's more than you usually have. But my point today is this. We need to understand the difference between being offended and taking offense. And if both partners could do that, it would solve so many things. It would make so many things easy. In fact, you could just say, you're being a little bit like Archie right now. It's like, yeah, you're right. I better stop. Thank you, Edith. Whatever code words. But you understand what I'm saying? If we don't learn these things, we're just going to keep on going. But here is the really good news. The really good news is this. Jesus knows. He knew, and he hasn't given up. The Apostle Paul says in his letter to the church in Ephesus, he came to preach peace to those who were far away and to those who were near. And he was speaking of the Gentiles and the Jews, but it's true of the Archies and the Ediths. He came to preach peace to those who are far and those who are near. And not only did he come to preach peace, he made peace possible. Because it says, in his own flesh, he has reconciled the two. Everything we need to grow and to learn and to humble ourselves and to forgive and to be forgiven is made possible because of Jesus. He teaches us. He transforms us from the inside. His Spirit lives in us and guides us. It just takes us to be willing to read the instructions and say, yeah, I've been playing wrong all these years. And this morning, I invite you all to partake of the body and the blood of Jesus. It's the most powerful thing in the world. I've said this before, but I love this thought. You see, when God wanted to create, he said, let there be. But when he wanted to forgive you, words weren't enough. He had to become flesh. He had to lay down his life. His blood was poured out. There is nothing in all of ever that is more powerful than the blood of Jesus. And this morning we get to begin again. Let's pray. Father, thank you for what you have done. Thank you that you so loved the world that you gave your only begotten Son. And Jesus, I can't even begin to understand your power. It says that you are able to do immeasurably more than all that we could ask or imagine. And so I just ask you to help us be normal. Help us to know how to love one another, to know how to love you. Please, Jesus, work in us. In your name we pray.